Coley.
Present.
Member Deputy.
Here.
Member Hess. Absent. Chair Kavanaugh.
Present. Okay, great. Let's have a pledge of allegiance. We'll all stand, please, and raise the flag. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, we've got the agenda that's been prepared and noticed for today. As I was, I have one comment about it. I don't know, and then I'll take others. But as I was looking at the agenda, I think it covers the thing that we expected and so forth. But as I was thinking about it, we have a couple items at number 4A and 4B that are actually cases that involve a couple places downtown and so forth, and reviewing that. And there's one of the items that we also that we have later on is conflict of interest training. And that is just, letting us as members of the board and the public have a better understanding of the parameters of the conflict of interest law here in California and how that might affect us, and makes us sensitive to the matters that we have to pass on. So I thought it might be useful to begin the meeting with that conflict of interest training rather than have it at the end of the meeting today. So we're all sensitive to it. And I appreciate Assistant Counsel Chelsea with us today, and maybe even a little earlier than she was planning on being here. But I really appreciate her coming in to do that. I should just jump ahead to that, but are there any other changes or adjustments to the agenda that people may know?
I would just suggest that we put it after the item for public comment on items not on the agenda.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Is there, if there's nothing else, is there a motion to approve the agenda with that change, to move item 7 to the item just the last item in preliminary matters and just before the report of the subcommittee review?
I so move.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, so let's move on to, let's see, do I have everything? I guess public, the next item is then public comment on items not on the agenda. Are there?
There's also approval of the minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry, approval of the minutes. I skipped over that. I thought there was something there. The approval of the minutes of the meeting on September 16th. We did not have a meeting last month. And those are, begin on page 4 of the materials that were prepared. Any comments on the minutes as prepared and submitted?
None here.
I just had one note, and I'm not quite sure I have a solution for it, but it is in regards to the colors on the property on Alisal. And it seems to infer here that the decision that was made was approved by the applicant just because they wanted to expedite it. But I had felt as though the applicant also was happy with the decision, and I'm not sure, it's not like it's wrong, it just didn't, it seemed to omit that. It sounded more like it's like, okay, we'll do whatever you say. And I felt that was not completely accurate characterization in my recollection. That said, I don't have a suggestion to the wording to change that either.
I had a similar issue regarding that item and actually the next one too, both of them. These are development project review, so there's no real action that we take per se. There was no voting or whatever on this, so it's really a matter of, if I understand this correctly, it's a matter of us reviewing it, discussing it, establishing a record in our minutes, which then are shared or somehow communicated, I suppose, to the planning commission.
So, these projects were in that transition
Okay?
period, where they were reviewed by the committees, went to the planning commission with conditions that brought it back to the design review committee for items such as lighting, landscaping, colors. And so that did result in you making a final decision on those colors that were chosen and the lighting and everything else. So that, what we're gonna discuss later today is a change to that process. And,
Right.
so your actions and your vote was final.
Okay, yeah, but my concern was, in looking in these minutes here,
Uh-huh.
for both the item 5A and item, I guess, 6A, it just, there is no record of any action being taken. There's just, there being no further wishing to speak, care to have a closed public
I think we
comment,
should
period.
probably review the record and put a vote in there.
Okay, and the same kind of comment with regard to number 6A, it's just there being no further wishing to speak, Chairman Kavanaugh closed the public comments, period, and then we went on to the next item, and I'm thinking, that's not a very good record. I mean, it's, the minutes, I think, don't really record the official action of the committee.
Yeah,
And
so,
I think it's important that not only record accurately what we discussed and how we discussed it and the nuances that you're really referred to, but whether there was a sense of the committee as a whole that, is basically an agreement with that sense, or being able to pass on that sense to the planning commission or whoever.
so what I would recommend to you is go ahead and continue these items, the minutes, and we'll go back and look at the record. And,
Okay.
Yeah,
I would like, my sense is, I mean, if there's any objection, of course, but I would like you to do that and put, perhaps, create the amendment that, that shows what that action was.
Correct.
Okay, because it's not recorded in the minutes per se, unless I missed something.
No.
Okay. And I think that's the only comments I have on it. And anything else?
So if you can make a motion to that effect to continue the item.
Okay.
I move that we continue the minutes until next meeting.
I second.
Okay. Motion been made and seconded. Yes, I'll just go ahead and call the vote, if that's okay. Then all in favor of approving the minutes of the meeting on September 16th with that modification on, is, I guess, for items at least, or for 5A and 6A, I guess that's both, all the comments related to those two. Say aye.
Aye.
We're voting on continuing the meeting minutes till next meeting.
That's right, your motion.
Okay.
That's right. This
Yes,
is.
sorry, I got lost in
This is Esther's
there.
motion. I'm sorry, I didn't make it as clear as I should have. Okay, aye,
Aye.
okay, this is 4-0, yeah, thank you, sorry. Okay. With that, let me make sure I'm where we're supposed to be. Oh yeah, public comment on items not on the agenda. Is anyone here intending or wanting to give comments to the Design Review Committee on items not on the agenda? Anyone on the Zoom, in the Zoom space, want to give comments? Apparently not. So we'll move on to, let's see, Yeah, we'll move on, I think, at this point to the training, okay?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I'm going to present to you, give you a broad overview today on conflict of interest law in the state of California. I just want to start off and say that each potential conflict of interest is unique and it's a very fact-specific analysis. So when you do think that you have a conflict, it's best to try to get advice promptly when those issues come up. And if formal advice from the Fppc is the best kind of advice out there, because that's the only way to immunize yourself if the decision is later challenged. I can certainly, try to provide some guidance, but if the Fppc is going to be your best resource. Do you have the slides up?
If you could have the slides up, please, computer please.
And you can go to the next slide. Next slide, please. So this slide is just, saying what it means to be involved as a public official, and I put that up there just because, avoiding making decisions or issues over which you have a conflict really supports all of these aspects of being a good public official. So just wanted to keep that in mind. Next slide, please. So conflict of interest law is from three main sources. That's the Political Reform Act, common law rules, which in other words, case law made by judges, and the Government Code Section 1090. And I'm going to talk about mostly the Political Reform Act, but all three of those. And the idea is to avoid to make sure that city decisions are based on what's serving the public interest and not on bias or prejudice, and to make sure that the public's perception of the process is fair and legitimate. Next slide, please. So just keep in mind, if you have a conflict, it doesn't mean you've done anything wrong, it just means that you shouldn't participate in the decision. Next slide, please. So first I'm going to talk about the Political Reform Act. Broadly, it prohibits you from making, participating in, or influencing a decision in which you have a material financial interest. And again, this is going to be a very fact-specific inquiry. The Political Reform Act and the related regulations have detailed definitions and criteria for what actually counts as a conflict. So I always suggest, go back to the first principles every time you have one, make sure that you're walking through the analysis, and again, I'm happy to talk to you about it when you have a specific issue come up, but that's the basic idea. Next slide, please. As a practical matter, the kind of litmus test is if it's reasonably foreseeable that the decision will have a material financial effect on you, your spouse, your dependent children, or your business, or your real property, that's different from how it affects the public generally. So you can think about that in terms for, like let's say the city council, when they're, doing a general plan amendment, that's certainly going to affect their property in the city, but it's also affecting everybody else equally, so that's not a conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just kind of an idea. It has to affect you differently than the public. All right, next slide, please. So if you think you have a conflict, this is kind of the process you go through. Is it reasonably foreseeable that there's going to be an effect on your financial interest? Are those effects material? And again, the law is going to spell out kind of what is reasonably foreseeable and what is material. And if it is reasonably foreseeable and material, does it affect the public the same or differently? And if it's affecting you specifically, not the public generally, then are you going to be participating or making it or influencing the decision about that issue and that financial interest? Next slide, please. So this is the main kind of categories of financial interest are business entities, real property, sources of income, and gifts. Like I said, the regulations have detailed criteria about which types of businesses, how much money is at stake, where the property is located in relationship to the project, and stuff like that will, it's not just any business that you have, but there's different criteria. But those are the big buckets to think about when a project comes up, if you could potentially have a financial conflict. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the real property rules, because that one comes up a lot, especially in a small geographical location like Solvang. So there's, you've got to think about it all the time, but there is a default that if you're within 500 feet of a real property, if the project or decision is going to involve a location that's within 500 feet of a real property that you have an interest in, whether you own it or own part of it, the presumption is that you are materially and directly affected and you would have a conflict. You can rebut that presumption, but you're going to need formal advice from the Fppc to say that that's not actually affecting you. I don't think this is as relevant in Solvang, but if you're in a community that has HOA common areas, if you're 500 feet, within 500 feet from that, but not 500 feet from the actual location of the project, that doesn't count anymore. So you can, be near the park that's part of the common area, but, far enough away from the actual, single family home that's the project.
Okay.
Next slide, please. So even if you're outside that 500-foot circle, though, it's not like you don't have to think about it. You do still want to consider whether the decision will have a material financial effect on your real property interest. And then if you're in this buffer zone between 500 feet and 1,000 feet away from it, there's certain criteria that you look at, and that's whether the decision's going to change the property's development potential, income potential, highest best use, character, market value. And then after more than 1,000 feet away, it's the reverse of the 500-foot rule, and there's a presumption that's rebuttable that you don't have a financial effect. There isn't a material financial effect. So there's some bright lines there. All right. So if you do think you have a conflict, this is where the rubber meets the road. This is what you do. You have to, once the item's called on the agenda, you state that you have a conflict, and you have to state that what the type of conflict it is, describe the conflict of interest with sufficient detail to be understood by the public. It's also important that not only can you not participate in the decision, you also can't use your office to influence the rest of the body who is participating in the decision. So, you can't recuse yourself and then say, hey, everybody vote for this project, right? That would be inappropriate and a violation of the conflict of interest laws. So once you've recused yourself and stated the nature of your conflict, then you have to leave the room after the disposition of the matter, after the body makes a decision. The exception to that is if it's an item on the consent calendar, you can still stay in the room for the consent calendar, because there's not going to be a discussion of the item, and there would be no, no suggestion that you're influencing the decision by sitting on the dais there. So that's the order of events when you think that you have a conflict under the Political Reform Act. Next slide, please.
Okay, can I ask a question?
Yes, of course.
Or do you want to wait till
Oh, it's okay.
my question on the previous slide
We could go back.
and that issue.
Mm-hmm.
Say one of us recuses ourselves from that issue. Does that mean that our family members, spouses, partners, whatever, would they be able to address the committee as a public statement?
Yes.
Or are they also recused?
No, they can speak as members of the public, and actually you could still speak as a member of the public. You would just not do it from the dais.
Okay.
And I caution you on that, because you have to have an applicable personal interest to be able to speak on it. It's not, there's going to be some overlap. You still can't use your office to influence the decision. So I think you should be careful if you decide to speak as a member of the public, that you're not somehow, making it seem like you're doing so as a committee member.
Okay.
But yes, your family members could still speak, and technically you can too, but I would be careful about it.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
So on that same question, I'm just gonna ask, so just a hypothetical situation, I open a new business and I'm getting a sign approval. I would obviously recuse myself from that decision, but I could still be present to answer questions. Not so much to say like, this is why I think you should let me do it, but just, I mean, your advice would be to just answer questions basically on the design or have a representative, is that a better?
I mean, it's probably better to have a representative,
Yeah.
but you can speak as a member of the public.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Is there any obligation, or it says that when you state that conflict of interest and recuse yourself, that's during the meeting though?
Yes.
There's nothing that requires you to do it a priority in advance of the meeting or anything like that?
No, and it's supposed to be done like when the item is.
When the
pulled
item
to
comes up on the agenda, I see,
Yeah.
okay.
Because you should be, and we would hope that you'd be participating in the rest of the meeting, and you're not supposed to avoid conflicts by not showing up at the meeting, because
You're-
the point is to disclose the conflict.
For the item, yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So another aspect of this, if you go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Is that you have to file your Form 700 upon assuming office, and then annually thereafter, and when you leave office. And, this is not something the city will do for you. It's definitely your responsibility. I also have to file one, and it's on me to make sure it's on time. And if you don't, there can be some consequences to that. So that's another aspect that it happens outside of the meeting that's important. Next slide, please. And this just has more specifics on the timing. So every year it's due April 1st, and you guys would have all filed it with 30 days after starting or assuming your office as a committee member. And the clerk's office can provide more information about which particular interests you need to report on those forms. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is just pointing out that there are some hefty consequences if conflicts are not followed. If the action by the body could be rescinded, and personally, the person violating the conflicts of interest could face civil penalties up to $5,000 and criminal penalties. So the state means business when they're talking about conflicts of interest. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned at the top, formal advice from the FPPC is the strongest. You can, if they tell you that you don't have a conflict and somebody later challenges that decision, you have some immunity there for why you participated. And for FPPC also provides a hotline, which is up there for informal advice. And that can be useful. You're not gonna have the same immunity benefit, but that's what they do all day, every day, so they can be very helpful. I can also give you general advice, but ultimately it will be your decision about whether you have a conflict or not. And you can also, of course, consult your own attorney. Next slide, please. So the other areas, the Political Reform Act is the big one, but the other places where conflict law comes up is in case law, so common law. There's some disagreement in the cases about how the common law doctrine of conflicts of interest operates in light of California's statutory conflicts of interest laws that we just went over. But the general sense is that at a minimum, it means that even if you don't have a strict statutory financial conflict, if you feel that you are not able to be unbiased or that you would have some prejudice against the applicant, that is also another reason to recuse yourself. Okay. One thing to keep in mind though is if you recuse yourself for that type of a reason and the body doesn't have a quorum, there are provisions under the Political Reform Act that allow for a member to be pulled back to participate in the decision just even though they have a conflict, but that only applies if their recusal was under the Political Reform Act, not for a general, I think I'm best friends with the applicant and can't be unbiased. So just something to keep in mind. And then the last category is Government Code 1090. So unlike the other two, this is not about when you're making a decision on a project. 1090 actually prohibits you and a member of your family from making a contract where you would have a direct interest in a contract with the city, or an indirect interest. So that means like if you have a business relationship with the entity that's contracting with the city, 1090 prohibits that. There are some exceptions, very limited ones, but the idea is basically to make sure that you're not using your position to, financially benefit yourself. 1090 also has pretty strict consequences if you violate it. You can get fined up to $1,000, face imprisonment, and be disqualified from holding public office. And the contract itself would be void. So they, again, state means when it comes to this. Yeah, so that's all I have.
Okay.
I'm happy to answer questions.
Any questions? I have one question. You said, because the test is material financial effect, not no financial effect, material financial effect. And so if I have a tire store downtown and there's something that comes up, less than 500 feet away at a candy store, non-competitive, whatever. I saw that you said there's a process or whatever to go to the state
FPC.
agency. Yeah.
Yeah.
To file an explanation essentially of, that overcomes the presumption of conflict.
Yeah, so that's specific.
And how does that, when do you do that? You want to participate in the deal because you're a member of the group, but it seems like this presumption of conflict because of the 500-foot rule, would, cause a number of, qualified, public servants to recuse themselves.
Yeah, I think that is the most common one, even in neighborhoods and stuff. You're talking about downtown solving. But yeah, so you would have to submit an inquiry to FPPC. I think it takes them, a couple weeks to a month to respond, so you kind of have to be looking ahead. Which, Lori does provide, outward-looking timelines of when projects will be coming up and the addresses. So it's good to pay attention to that when she presents, because you can see if there's going to be a project coming down the road the next couple of months, or that's in the pipeline, that you might have an interest nearby. And that would be the time to start reaching out to FPPC if you think that even though it's within 500 feet, that it's really not going to affect your property at all.
But you should do that though before the hearing.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I will not be, and FPPC will not be able to say yes or no, you don't have a conflict in the middle of the meeting. And in fact, I'm never going to tell you whether you have a conflict or not. And you can call it a hotline, and I understand that, they'll give you advice much more quickly on that, but it's not a formal advice, so it wouldn't, immunize you in the same way. But it's certainly a very valuable tool, especially for, the 500, being within the 500-foot rule, you need the formal advice to flip the presumption. But
that's what I mean.
Let's say, but let's say you're in.
Because I can see it very commonly not being a material financial effect.
Yeah, totally. But let's say you're within the 500 and 1,000 and it's kind of not as clear and you're trying to weigh out the factors, maybe that's a good time to call the hotline because they might be able to help you decide.
But under 500 feet, there's a process that you expect it to go through.
Well, it's the regulations presume that there is a material financial effect.
Yeah, that's what I know.
Yeah, so to flip it, you have to get formal advice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good. This has been helpful for me, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, it is helpful to go over this, and I did have a concern at the time that the Theater Fest was on the agenda, and because of my role at the museum, which is, I'm not quite sure if it's 500 feet or less or more, but it's in that area. And I did talk to the city attorney about it at that time, prior to the meeting, because of my concern about potential or perceived conflict.
Yeah. And, this is another opportunity to remind you too, often applicants reach out to members of the committee or planning commission or city council. And, as part of the wanting to make things, everything transparent, it's always good to, when a project is called, to explain any ex parte communication that you've had with the project applicant. It's not bad that they've talked to you and you've heard their concerns, but the public should understand what has happened outside the meeting as well.
Thank you so much, because I think, it's really important that we maintain the confidence of the people in the city, that we're doing things that way. I mean, that we're not being influenced by those kinds of conflicts, almost subconsciously even. So I think it's important that we work hard to maintain the confidence of the citizens of the community. Very good, thank you so
You're
much,
welcome.
Chelsea, I appreciate that. Anything else? Okay, I think the next thing we have is, I'm on item 4, I believe.
Yes.
And item, let's see. Yeah, 4A is at 473 Atterdag Road, Peasants and Deli awning. Lori, do you want to give us your report recommendation,
Sure,
or review it?
yes. This project is located on Copenhagen Drive, and it is immediately across the street from Pheasant Restaurant, Pheasant Feast, and they are going to expand into a lease space for deli and market, and they're mirroring an awning that is on the Copenhagen side of Pheasant Feast, black awning with the Pheasant and Feast on their side, and this side will be Pheasant, lowercase letters, and then deli and market on the black awning. It's basically what I call a faux awning. It doesn't expand out to the street, and we're here today to recommend approval of this awning based on its relationship to the business across the street. I'm available for any questions, and I do know the applicant is, or the sign consultant is on
Okay,
Zoom.
okay. Is anyone who want to make comment regarding the applicant? Anybody here? Okay, on board, on Zoom?
Yeah, I'm here if you can hear me.
Yes.
I don't have any comments, but any questions you have, let me know.
Okay, great. Thank you. And identify yourself, please, for the record. I can see your name, but I'll let you do it.
805 Signs.
I said, I can see your name, but you go ahead and identify yourself, please.
Yeah, Brian, 805 Signs, Gilpin.
Okay, great. Okay, any questions? They're pretty straightforward, I think.
Yep.
Recommended by, yeah, please.
Yeah, I move.
We could give the opportunity for other members of the public to
Oh, yeah, are
comment
there
on
any
the
other-
project.
Any other comments from the members of the public? Okay, seeing none,
Close the public
Thank you.
comment.
seeing none. We'll close for comment, and did you have something to,
I was just gonna move that we approve the awning and lettering as presented.
I'll second.
okay? Moved and seconded to approve the sign application as presented and in accordance with the contract plan of recommendation. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. 4-0.
I will let Michael of Peasants Feast know. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate your patience.
I also-
Have a good Thanksgiving. Take
I
care.
wanted to congratulate Peasants Feast. They opened during the pandemic
Yeah.
and done so well, it seems that they are now expanding, so
Yeah,
good news.
that is good.
Yeah, it's great.
Thank you.
Good comment. Okay, next item is item 6A. Or, no, I'm off. Item 4B is 6, is that right? That doesn't sound right, Pete. It's 1607 Mission Drive, Sarah?
Yes, this
Yeah.
is a request of several of the tenants within 1607 Mission Drive, the Park Place building. They have established their residency in there, done their tenant approvals, established their businesses, and have come to the city to say they're still having issues with trying to draw traffic, foot traffic, as well as street traffic into the parking lot to their businesses. The original Park Place project had a master plan that was approved probably about 6 months ago. Your committee approved that plan. There is a directory on the side of the building following what was approved in the plan. It's just, it's only on one side of the building, so even if you catch the sign, it's pretty small for the actual tenant that are listed there. So the request by the tenants within the courtyard area is to put a directory sign out front, a little bit more prominent. And what they are recommending is to have a sign that looks very similar to the one that Sanger has kind of across the street, where each panel is much larger and are in a prominent place so you can see what's happening within the courtyard area. I don't know if you've had a chance to visit lately, but it's very nice setting, and we want to make sure that they're successful, and this is a solution to provide an opportunity for them to be more prominent along the street. This proposed sign plan was reviewed by the landowner, and we did get confirmation that they're in support of this. And the important thing to remember is the way the sign is going to be located in front of the building. The panels will be read from both sides. So as you're heading east or west on Mission
246,
Drive, you'll be
yeah.
able to see it on both sides.
And they are 8 inches by 30 inches, so, yeah, and that is in conformance with sign standards, is that correct?
Mhm.
Just want to
Yes.
establish the record on that, yeah.
It mirrors what Sager did across the street.
Can we just clarify, you both mentioned 1607 Mission Drive, but on the agenda, it's 1623 Mission Drive?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Did I may have missed, I may have
No, that's right, I just
misread, I'm
wanted to
sorry.
make sure for the record we have the right address. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, I appreciate it.
I just had a question, would the signs be 3D signs, or what style? I mean, I see the design style, but would they be raised or would they be flat?
The requirement is that they be raised.
Right,
That there's
okay.
dimension to them.
Right, great.
Thank you, yeah, I apologize again for the mistake, but
Yeah.
the agenda says 1607, and that's okay, I'm glad you got that clarification. And do you want to make a comment about the sandwich board?
Well, the sandwich, the reason that they are there is because
Yeah,
they're
I know,
trying to get
necessity is the
traffic.
mother of invention.
Those sandwich boards are not permitted by the city, and
Okay.
they do need to be removed.
Okay,
I think the sign looks nice.
I do too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there was concern, I mean, it's, with each of those, it's a kind of a large space there, but I think that'll certainly improve. And we wanted to make sure it was in, and before the committee today, rather than next month, so they'd have an opportunity to, thank you, they'd have an opportunity to, if we approved it, to get it going and so forth in time for the holiday season and so forth.
Is there?
We have-
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
Are there only 6 units in that whole space?
Yes.
Oh.
There's one space that is vacant that it looks like there might be a tenant in there.
Okay,
And so we'd have to look at how those panels would be done, so they're in, scale, size
Sure.
and scale.
right.
These are the ones that came forward
That are
asking
forward.
for.
And it's just the businesses inside the courtyard, not the ones that are facing
Correct.
the street? Got it.
Those would not be listed on this panel.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, great. We do have 4 people who have indicated they'd like to have an opportunity to speak to the council on this item. First person is Jamie Edlin.
Hello, thank you for having us.
Our pleasure.
I think that there's really nothing more to say other than we need signage. We're amazed at how many locals don't even know that there's a courtyard behind those businesses that are fronting the building. And we have people who know us and some of the other tenants that are looking for us with the address and still can't find us. So this, in order to do business, we rented our different spaces in order to do business and attract street and foot traffic. We desperately need signage.
Right.
Simple as that.
What business, Jamie, do you represent?
Cordon Wine, Cordon of Sag Harbor Winery.
Mhm. Very good. Anything else?
Simple.
Thank you. We appreciate that. We'll be taking action shortly on this, I'm
Great.
sure. Next person is Daniel Schneider? Schneider, I'm sorry.
Daniel Schneider. I also represent Cordon of Santa Barbara Winery, and I just want to stress, we do need the signage to get people in.
Duly noted. Thank you so much.
Thank
We appreciate you coming tonight and expressing your concern and support for this. Next item is, or next person is Channing Jones,
Hi,
representing
Almarosa.
Almorosa.
Yeah, so I second what Jamie has said. We need to find a way to drive in traffic into the courtyard to support all of the businesses.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you.
Any questions or comments? Okay. And finally, I have a request to speak from Katrina Watkins.
Hi, I'm from Dascombe Cellars, and we were located in downtown Solvang for a good 10 years. When COVID hit, we unfortunately had to close the doors, and we're excited to reopen in the courtyard with all these other lovely businesses, but everybody's just not aware we are back open yet because the signs are just not there. So as soon as we can, put the signs up, the sandwich board will be taken in. It's just a matter of, oh my God, I didn't know you guys were open again. When did you reopen? And
Yeah,
so it's kind of imperative for all of us, so
good.
thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much to all four of you for your additional comments. Anyone else have any comments on this particular item? Oh, seeing none, I will turn to the committee. Anyone have any other comments about this?
I agree that I wasn't aware Dascombe was back, and I live in town, so I wish you all the best of luck, and I personally think the signs are probably very necessary
No question.
to help, yeah.
Good.
I just wanted to,
Yeah, please.
I know you asked this, Joy, and I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear the
No.
answer. The style of the signs, they're just the flat panel signs, so they're a little bit different from what's presented on most other businesses. Is that within the ordinance? I just wanna make sure that we're.
The requirement is that they be dimensional signs.
Okay,
And, we've worked hard with the applicants to get this on the agenda, realizing the situation that they're in. So we were able to get our exhibits and everything in. They just didn't have as much detail. But we'll work with them to make sure that they meet the city's requirements on the dimensional signs.
And we could certainly make that a matter of approval.
yes,
Yeah.
and I guess the other thing is that the scale is again conforming to current city requirements. That's just my concern. They seem a little bit big, but I think it's really important that you have signage there. I'm sure it'll be a big plus. I was very surprised driving down the road that I glanced in and saw Omarosa. I didn't know that they had moved from Buellton to Solvang, and I look forward to visiting the courtyard and seeing all of you there. I think this will help you, and I don't see that it extends into any public area. It's completely tucked in the planter there, so it seems like a perfect location and should be a real great draw to bring people in.
Very good. Someone want to make a motion?
Should we open public comment?
I'm sorry?
Everybody,
Oh,
public comment on Zoom?
okay, are there any comments on Zoom? I'm sorry.
Appears to be none.
No, apparently not. Thank you.
Then I will move to accept this as presented, the signs as presented.
I'll second that.
And seconded, great.
And that does include that being the
Dimensional
sign. Okay.
Good luck, everyone.
Right.
We'll be sure to spread the word.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, okay, so we have a motion and a second. With,
All those in
to
favor?
approve this with the qualifications. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
4-0. Okay, great. Thank you.
That courtyard is really looking nice. It seems to be a very good addition to the community there, and it's nice that it's also pretty much fully occupied now. I'm sure that's helping all of you as well.
Thank you.
Okay, good luck to you.
Come on over and taste wine.
And welcome
Okay, good.
down.
We'll do that too.
Welcome back.
Twist my arm.
We do have 2-for-1 cards available.
Okay.
No conflicts.
And we have an artist reception on Friday night, tomorrow night, from 5 to 7.
Great. Good. Well, good luck to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, terrific. Okay, I'm glad that we got that done early. Thanks, Xenia, for your efforts to accelerate that so that it happened. They came in a little late, and, you know, yeah, our job is to make it possible if we can. Okay, great.
I hope that they might reconsider that sandwich board going away sooner as opposed to later too. That was my one kind of comment, that we understand that there are challenges, but we would like to see them comply with the existing rules while this is resolved.
Okay. We're moving on now to the next item on the agenda, which is, I have it as item 6, which is pages 19 on the material that's been presented, relating to recommended code amendments to clarify design review committee powers and duties. You know, Xenia and I'd like you to review this. Xenia, I guess you'll be presenting this in the background of it, but for me to establish a record and also to explain to others how we got here. You know, we've been talking through the course of the year, and it's been a year now, that's just about a year that the Design Review Committee's been in existence, and I think we made great progress in a number of ways, and gotten the backlog worked on and so forth, but also tried to set up some expectations in the community that are positive. But we've often described that the processes that we're putting together that are described in the amended city code, and there were a number of amendments at the time of the resolution that established the Design Review Committee, that those processes can be cumbersome and confusing, and it can also delay improvements in our town and its commercial vitality. And we've had a number of those instances, and we've kind of commented on them during the time. And so in our conversation, the city manager has expressed support to review those provisions and suggest some recommendations in the city code to help clarify the processes and streamline the process and make it easier. Because I think, you know, when we have planning commission and we have the DRC, and they both sort of have overlapping responsibilities, I think we want to make sure that the processes that we're expecting people to go through are not confusing and are streamlined and so forth. And to do that, the amendments are before us. I'll just leave you to explain, but you know, there's one the biggest, or I guess the first one really relates under the 2-4-4 amendment. The very first one, which is on page 22 in this attachment A, that would make the Design Review Committee's role advisory and recommendation to the Planning Commission regarding color design exterior architecture, buildings, landscaping, and lighting aspects for applications relating to development plans, conditional use permits, tentative maps, and specific plan or other planning commission, for other planning commission approvals. In other areas, and there's a whole range of other areas, signs and so forth, our decisions would not be advisory, but would constitute appealable actions, either appealable to the city council, and in a couple cases, because we are an appeal board for the city on a number of areas, it would actually make it appealable, as I understand it, and make our action the final administrative action by the city. And that's under the terms of, of some of the codes places that are there now. I guess I'll before I complete any more, make more comments on it myself, I'll turn that over to you, and you can explain the process and the content of these. I appreciate very much, though, your efforts and the efforts of Chelsea to work on this and do such a good job to help streamline that process.
Thank you, Chair, for that background. Yes, there's been we really worked on this item to make sure that we come up with the most expedient process for the applicants to go through, to make sure that there's no redundancies and there's also clarity as to responsibility and the process. So as you've mentioned, historically, the code has some sections that existed before where things have changed. As you know, there was the VAR, the Fppc, and now the DRC. So this was an opportunity for us to make sure that we are all aligned with our current structures for our committees. So with the assistance of Lori, our planning consultant, and Chelsea, our assistant city attorney, we have all worked through this process, and we're here to present today the recommendations that will be going to the planning commission and then ultimately to the city council for their approval. So we're presenting it to you to make sure that you have an opportunity to hear and make general comments, and then we'll go to those next steps. So Chelsea has done lots of cleanup and reading and has recommendations on how to go forward. And then we've also created a couple of visual slides at the end of that presentation that we can use to just kind of briefly describe to you what the new process would be.
Okay, sounds great.
Yes. So in the staff report, as you've seen, there's attachment A, and that outlines the actual in-text edits that we're suggesting, but I'll just kind of broadly go through the categories of changes that we're talking about. The first big category is that we're recommending edits to the code to clarify the context in which the committee is the final approving body and when the committee is providing recommendations to the planning commission. And in general, anytime that you all are reviewing a project or aspects of a project that will also go before the planning commission, a good example would be because it's part of a conditional use permit, for example. Your review would be to look at the project and provide recommendations to the planning commission, and then the planning commission would make the final decision on the entire project, including the aspects that the design review committee reviewed and provided recommendations on. And then the planning commission's decision would be appealable, but your recommendations to the planning commission would not separately be appealable. Now, if you are reviewing a project or a part of a project that does not go before the planning commission, for example, a sign application like what we just looked at tonight, the planning commission doesn't review sign applications, so you all would have the final decision on that application. Similarly, if let's say there's a landscaping plan that is for an existing building, so there's no development plan or conditional use permit that's happening with that project, they just want to modify their landscaping or modify their exterior lighting, you all would have review of that aspect of the project, but the planning commission is not involved, so you would have final say on that aspect of the project and have a final decision that would be appealable to the city council. So we've tried to make changes in the code to clearly delineate those two pathways, and that is also resulting in a more streamlined process, because when a project comes before you, you are either the only discretionary body reviewing the project, or you will review it first, and then it goes to planning commission, who makes the final decision. We will no longer have a situation where it goes to the DRC, planning commission, and then back to the DRC. I would say the only exception to that is that the planning commission could request further clarification on your recommendations and ask that you review the project again, but it would all be before they make a final decision. So we won't have a situation where the planning commission has made a final decision and then you all have to come back and make a final decision on pieces of the project that the planning commission reviewed and decided. So it should be very clear what body is the final decider, and kind of remove that roundabout feeling in the application process for applicants. So that is a section of the code amendments. Another area of cleanup related to that is that there were several places in the code that said the design review committee's decisions were appealable to the planning commission pursuant to Title I, Chapter 6 of the code. But Title I, Chapter 6 of the code has to do with the city appeals to the city council. So staff felt that those references to the planning commission and appeal to the planning commission in those instances were actually an error. And so we've addressed that and made those sections say appeal of the committee's decision to the city council. And so now throughout the code that's consistent. Anytime that your decision is appealable, it's going to city council directly.
Okay, I thought that, well, I won't get into it, because I thought it's a minor thing. There were a couple things, a couple areas. I thought under,
So there is a place where
under maybe section 534 or whatever,
yes,
where,
so that is,
we're like designated by the city council as the appeal.
right, so you, in that case, you are the appeal body, but I'm talking about when you're making a decision on a project, it always is appealed to the city council if the applicant wants to appeal it. But yes, you're right, the section Title 5 has that, you're sort of acting in a different role.
Yeah, an odd role, and then that is final administrative action by the city to be appealed to district court.
Right, and that's a special circumstance.
Okay.
Different bucket of what the action you're doing, yes.
Right.
And then finally, we're also amending, well not finally, but another bucket is that part of that appeal section is that we're amending section 1117.5, which is the section in the zoning code that explains, you know, how you appeal or where you appeal a planning commission decision and a DRC decision. And so we've amended that to clearly delineate this concept of when the DRC is providing recommendations to the planning commission, it's the planning commission's decision that's appealable. And that when you have a standalone project that doesn't go to the planning commission, your decision is appealable.
Okay.
So we've made consistent edits there
Okay.
as well. And then finally, there's just a few other cleanups. We wanted to point out that throughout the changes, you will see that we've been changing planning director to planning manager, making other conforming changes to the titles for the planning department in the code. And that is a broader cleanup that we're doing that's going to be going before planning commission and city council. But it happens to affect some of the sections that we're talking about today. So I just wanted to explain why those edits were being made as well. And so you're not surprised when that
doesn't
comes up.
directly affect us so much, though.
No, it's just a reorganization that the city council already approved for the planning department, but we need the code to reflect that. And for our purposes as staff, we're kind of looking at this holistically. You know, you guys are reviewing a piece of it, planning commission is reviewing another chunk, and we wanted to keep the changes to the sections consistent. So that's why you're seeing that. But yeah, it doesn't really affect the issue before us today.
Okay.
And then finally, we're also recommending deletion of some language in 11.6b1, section 11.6b1, because it's explaining a process that's not consistent with how the city currently processes applications for multifamily units. Basically, under the current code, the planning director, which now doesn't exist as an entity, but let's say the head of the planning department, would be the decision maker for projects of 16 units or less for multifamily housing. But the city currently doesn't process it that way. It doesn't distinguish 16 units or less. The projects would be reviewed by the planning commission under their regular development plan review. And the staff felt that the current practice is a better practice than what was reflected in the code. So we wanted to update that to make it consistent and not have this kind of strange little carve out.
Yeah, the design review committee,
It was also unclear what exactly it meant in the code when the design review committee shall review it. It was very ambiguous,
right,
so
and that's all deleted.
yes.
Yeah.
So that again kind of clarifies,
Okay.
puts some clear boundaries on when you all are deciding and in what capacity and what
Okay.
type of decisions you're making.
Okay.
That's what the DR Design Residential District, I didn't understand what that was. That 116B-1?
Yeah.
6B-1, yeah.
Yeah, bottom of page
Mhm.
22.
Yeah.
Yeah, the last edit. So just deleting the language there that's struck out.
Yeah, I
Okay,
mean, it's
but-
not, the section isn't deleted, but just that, except as follows, or whatever.
Right, but what is the DR Design Residential District? I don't know what that is.
So the design residential, the design residential district is, pretty much surrounds the TRZ zone, the next 2 blocks in each direction. You also have the design review in, I'll use the example, the Mission Apartments project at St. George's Piece is a DR designated area, and those are higher density residential. Most of those are at 20 units per acre. And so this particular provision seemed awkward in, when you're working with different projects, they should all be handled consistently and not arbitrarily setting a number that you go through a staff level review versus a planning commission review.
It makes sense, I just wasn't familiar with that designation of the DR.
I think
Right, it was news to me too, with the 16 units and so forth.
the Alisal project that we just reviewed last time was in the DR 20, right?
Right, and like Nyborg Estates would fit under that, although it's completely developed, that kind of thing.
Correct.
Okay.
So we do have 2 illustrations that kind of summarize the presentation that Chelsea just provided. I don't know if you can pull those up. So the design review committee, if it's only for design review, and again, things like signs, landscaping, colors, and materials that are on existing buildings, the design review committee is the final decision maker, and you will take a vote on that. And only afterwards, within 10 days, they could appeal that to the city council. So a 2-step process. The other illustration identifies the recommendation that's being made here with changes where the DRC would be the recommending body on all of the things that you have been reviewing already: colors, materials, lighting, landscaping, circulation, just an overall review of the project. Make that recommendation to the planning commission. Planning commission will be looking at the environmental review and other things that they have to take into consideration in their decision. And at that point, they will incorporate your recommendations. And then
Or not.
you're done.
No,
Then
it's
if there is
or not. I mean, you said they will incorporate your recommendations.
Right.
That's one of the issues that I have to talk about, but I'll do that, I'll defer later, but it's, unless it's directed, they're not obligated to adopt our, under the language now, are not required to adopt our recommendation.
Correct.
Or
I mean, it's advice or recommendation is what you call it.
Yeah, it is, yeah, I think we need to.
So let me just
Yeah,
one
yeah, go
moment,
ahead,
just finish the step. So there's a 10-day appeal period to the city council based on what the actions that the planning commission takes. The difference that we will be putting into the staff reports for the planning commission were a number of conditions that we previously had, that the project would get approved and then would be sent back to the DRC for final review of lighting and landscaping and colors and all those things. And that step has been the one that's kind of gotten murky between the planning commission and the design review committee, and so we're cutting out that second review after the planning commission's decisions and relying on the recommendation to the planning commission.
I understand it, and I like it overall. I mean, I think there's a few little tweaks in my own view, but I think overall, personally, I think I understand it and appreciate what you've done.
So we're available for any questions?
Okay.
I think there might be public comment.
You can
Okay,
ask questions of staff first if you'd like, and then we can open the public comment period.
okay, questions of staff first? Anybody have questions?
Yes.
Okay.
It would help me to understand a little bit more about the board recommendation and how that is handled at the planning commission side of it. So, I mean, that makes it sound like they can look at it, not look at it, follow our directions. Is there any wording that gives the planning commission direction that they would accept that unless there were some exceptions found? What kind of weight would our recommendation have? I'm comfortable, I guess, maybe a little bit with the word recommendation, and would maybe prefer something like report, so that we provide a report that is utilized as it sounds like that would have a little bit more weight, but perhaps that already exists. I don't know what's in the wording for planning.
So at this point, we're not recommending changes to the planning commission's powers and duties section because their section is very broad. Basically, they make sure things are, conforming to the general plan and stuff like that. The DRC has much more specific enumerated powers in the code. But certainly as it's drafted now, you would be providing recommendations. I think the idea is that the planning commission would be deferential to those, but they are not required to under the code as proposed.
Right. Yeah, and I kind of have the same thing. I do note that nothing in the amendments here changed the Design Review Committee's one of the primary responsibilities or duties or responsibilities to develop aesthetic standards or requirements for properties within the village of the city. I mean, that remains our obligation, and so then the question is, we establish those. Is the Planning Commission obligated to apply design standards we create when they make their decisions?
So what we would recommend is, and again, this is
I mean, we're obligated to, it seems to me, excuse me, but we're obligated to basically, follow those. We're obligated to establish them and maintain them, and we've worked on that. But then also, it would seem to me that the Planning Commission should be either required to do that, that would be part of our recommendation, or like we do other applicants, explain why not.
So what we would recommend as far as implementing these changes is we would bring a development project before the design review committee and have those items ticked out as far as lighting, landscaping, materials, colors, and have actual actions and recommendations for each one of those. And that would be the report to the planning commission as far as implementing or recommending to them that you'd want to see these items included in the project. And the DRC does have the opportunity to come to a planning commission and speak on the recommendations that are being brought forward. The planning commission also has to make findings of approval, and their findings are very similar to what your findings are. Consistency with the general plan, consistency with the design regulations, consistency with the environmental review. And so I think you'll see that they're going to be respectful of your recommendation because you're both trying to accomplish the same goal.
Right.
And I want to kind of step back and just say, I'm really glad to see this process taking place. I think this is better for the applicant, it's better for our committee as a whole, this is overall a good step. So the fact that I'm getting into the little nitty-gritty doesn't mean that I don't think this is a good step forward. I think it is across the board. Again, it's just my concern that we are depending upon the members of the planning commission to follow our recommendations, but there's nothing that really compels them to do so. And I just wish there was maybe a way of wording that so that it had a little bit more weight to it as opposed to a recommendation, that we could expect that would be something that they could usually be following unless there were extenuating circumstances or something that we were unaware of.
Yeah, I mean, it would be, something like, I think that if there is a variation or a deviation from the recommendation, should the planning commission be expected to explain that in their decision, in their order? If we say, we make a decision, a recommendation that's gonna be within our scope of of our scope of authority having to do with, whatever that is, the design issues that we've been working on. What's the language? The aesthetic standards and requirements of properties, yeah.
I guess I kind of think about the Alisal project as being an example of how the process doesn't work. We all acknowledge that under, unusual circumstances. But the planning commission gave a very, as I understand, enthusiastic endorsement of colors that were not conforming with the design standards as we understand them. And of course that caused confusion, which is leading us to today, because we don't want to go through that. That's kind of what's leading me to this conversation. Because it seems like as though sometimes the planning commission's members' expertise, their body of knowledge is a little bit different skill set than what we
And
provide
priorities,
here. Yeah.
And if I may say, those two I'm gonna say two examples. LSO, the water wheel.
The exceptions that prove the rule.
Well, first of all, that was the rule because we did not have this committee when those projects went to the
Right.
planning commission. And they had conditions to go back to the design committee, whether it was BAR or branding committee or DRC. And that's where you picked up the piece and said, it's now our obligation to review these projects, even though they had already gone to the planning commission and the planning commission had approved, the colors and everything else. And you stepped in and you said, this is going a bit too far. And that was appropriate, that was your role. We're trying to circumvent that by establishing a new set of rules as far as processing, so that you have the front seat on making recommendations to projects, and the planning commission can implement that with everything else that they're reviewing on the project. So I think it's gonna be much more comfortable for everybody involved to have your role upfront.
Yeah.
And being able to implement and make recommendations to the planning commission and ultimately to the city council for those projects that go to the city council.
Seems to me that a way to explain it in reference to that example on Alisal is, had we been doing this at the time, had this committee been in place and had this code been written the way it is now, we would have seen it, we would have made a designation, and likely the planning commission would have approved our designation and then would have avoided all that other stuff. I mean, that's sort of the assumption.
Ideally, yes.
Yeah.
Right. But I understand what you're saying is sort of a recommendation is kind of a broad term for this is our decision or whatever. I guess that's.
Yeah, I guess that's,
what you're concerned with.
yeah.
Yeah, I want to associate, associate myself with comments, obviously, that Esther's made about, this is, we're delighted to see this. It's just a couple of things, that's all. I mean, I think, but we're delighted to see.
And we've learned a lot over this last year, working with Nancy on the dark sky compliant provisions, working with our consultants on drought tolerant landscaping and how to incorporate that into the projects. And of course, really focusing in on your sensitivity to colors. And so we are bringing that to the applicants when they come in these are the things that you need to work with. This is what direction we've gotten from our committees to move these projects forward. And I think that it has proven, and is starting to prove successful.
And I think that goes to the application process that we've been, that as a committee have asked to have refined so that the responsibility of the applicant includes, submitting colors and samples, but also the reasons why they feel as though those colors and samples are appropriate for their building within the guidelines and appropriate to the neighborhood as well. And I think that just goes back to, I hope that this, as crafted, will go bring our report, recommendation, whatever that term is that's applied to it, to the planning commission with a presumption of validity as to what we're providing them, and hopefully bypass some work that the planning commission has to do. There's a couple of items in here that are just maybe for staff, because I think it's a mistake here on page 19. Top of the page, A8, and then down to item M.
Page 19?
You might be on a different.
19.
It's on,
that might be
nine,
a different
well,
agenda.
Oh, you know what, I'm sorry.
it's the third page of the attachment.
Yes, my apologies,
At
because
the very
I
top of the third page.
printed out the first agenda.
Okay, I'm with you now.
Okay, so the part about bike racks,
Mm-hmm.
get to the bold part, the design review committee shall review and provide recommendations to the planning commission on the location, design, and number of bike racks. I think,
There's a space that's missing.
and then stop, isn't it, because it repeats it.
Ah,
Yeah, that's just a typo.
yes, apologies.
And then I think that, item, let's see, since I'm off on my pages here. This,
Yeah, this is,
I think Pat can speak to that.
this is on the prior page,
Okay.
and this is the very last item, I guess, in 2-4-4. You have the it's item C. It says findings required for approval. We're talking about the findings required. Design review committee should make the following findings before any application, and then there are 9 elements of that, including overall building shape, mechanical and electrical equipment shall be well integrated, so forth. Does that remain?
Yes, sorry, I think I intended to put a ... there, I just didn't
Okay.
need to recopy.
So there's no
Stuff that-
changes?
Right, that
And then
wouldn't
on
be
that
changed.
same, I do have the section, I can give that to you if you don't have it readily available. This is 2-4-4. And turn the page, we just talked about C, which is there at the bottom of the page there.
Mm-hmm,
Turn the page, and there's another C.
okay,
And
so
I'm,
fix that.
that's
I
on
can
the,
clean that
on the
up,
system,
yeah.
so it should be a D, that's all.
Yes, we can certainly fix
Yeah.
that while we're in there.
Without, that's a friendly amendment.
Yes, thank you.
Let's see. Yeah, but there's still a number of things, so like I said, I think, we'll continue to have the responsibility that we have had to develop and maintain, on a lot of things directly, and then on an important set of other projects or applications, as a advisor to the planning commission, which is just fine. But I think we continue to have that responsibility, and the advice and recommendations that this committee would give to the planning commission will certainly be consistent with the standards we've been expected to develop and maintain and so forth. So it seems to me that those recommendations should be followed by the planning commission unless there's some extraordinary and compelling reason for them not to do so. And I think, for instance, if we say we recommend there ought to be dark brown half timbering on the project, and they come back and say, no, it's white. Be thinking
Or
of the
black.
LSL project, but,
Or black.
or vibrant blue. Then, obviously the record's out there, what our recommendation is and what they have done at variance with our recommendation, and I guess that's up to them, but I think, at that point, I think if there's a variance, I think they ought to identify it and explain at least, and I think they ought to say so, that they ought to explain why they're doing something different than what's been recommended or advised. That's sort of.
And thank you for your comments. We came here today to definitely get this feedback from you in terms of what's proposed so far. I think it's a very valid point that this committee was created by the city council, by the ordinance for a specific purpose with specific qualifications. And now it is your duties and responsibilities, and I agree that the planning commission has different duties and responsibilities. So as we go through this process, we'll definitely take this input from you and see if we can create some clarification in that.
Right, we've asked, and I think it's a great process, we've asked the applicants now, who are expected to comply with our design review standards, to explain why what they're proposing is consistent, rather than us saying, yeah, that comports or not, without, knowing exactly what that means. I want them to say, yeah, this is consistent with the traditional Danish, architecture and design, the traditional historic palette and whatever, and put the burden on them to explain why it does. And I want the planning commission to have the same, a similar burden if it's at variance with our recommendation, that's all.
And I would say, we'll definitely talk again. I think one of the things to just keep in mind out there that as of currently, you have this design guidelines, which are actually responsibility of this body to establish. As we go through the process of the general plan update, we'll also be working on the design guidelines element. So we'll think forward thinking through that process in terms of these changes and how to maintain that character and give this body the appropriate tools to do so.
Yep, please.
Pat, I see somebody who's been waiting on Zoom a long time. I wonder if this might be the right time to.
Nancy? Nancy, do you have any comments? Oh, I think so.
Oh, you're muted.
Do you have any comments about what we're discussing?
You had the sound for a second and now you're muted again, Nancy.
Yeah, you're still muted. We can't hear you. There you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can. Now we can.
Oh, no, she's muted.
Nope, no, you're muted again.
There you go.
Now can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, good, all right. I'm really glad to see the work that's been done by Xenia and our city attorney. It's something that I have had conversations with Xenia about and correspondence. And my concerns go beyond the design committee, review committee to the planning commission. And I just want to point out that the planning commission does not have anything in its duties and responsibilities that specifically relate to the approval or the consideration of individual projects and development projects and that kind of thing. It says such other functions and duties as imposed by law. And that does concern me because I think one of your big problems is trying to define what the responsibilities of the design review committee are and what the responsibilities of the planning commission are, and try to eliminate as much overlap as possible and place with the design review committee tasks which require developing certain kinds of expertise and that feed back to the design guidelines and some of the things in the design element. There needs to be congruence with those documents in terms of what your tasks are. And one of the problems tonight is that you're looking at amendments only, and when you look at the 2.44, there is some other material in that that's very important, and you don't have it in front of you, and that's the findings required for approval. And that list includes some findings that relate to architecture and building shapes, site layout, orientation and location of structures, buildings. And I think that it needs to be clearer who's going to have responsibility for the overall architecture of a building, so that you're not both trying to do the experts' work on that kind of detail. So I would encourage you not to approve anything at this point for going on to City Council until you've had a chance to really look at the amendments in the context of your entire description. Now, having said that, I'm questioning whether you want to limit the design review committee to just to the village area, because it seems to me the kind of expertise you develop is very important to be used for buildings anywhere in the city of Solvang. So I just think that's a question you need to look at. And it seems to me that there should be a way to give you a kind of final approval, as you were beginning to suggest, except when there might be some exceptional circumstances that would need to involve the planning commission in those decisions, because most everything is appealing to the city council, not to the planning commission. The other comment I have is specific to the lighting section, and I'm concerned that there isn't a reference to the fact of the ordinance. It would be easy to say, oh, okay, here's the description, and we can just work from that, and you have a whole ordinance that you have to work for. And that's true for the sign ordinance also. So those are some thoughts on this. I think it's always helpful to see what other people have done, other cities, what the county has done, and actually looking at the CBAR, which is our Central County Board of Architectural Review. I think you will see that there's some alignment between your responsibilities and their responsibilities. But they are in a little different situation with the Planning Commission, because the Planning Commission is the group to which you do appeals for these areas rather than the Board of Supervisors. So I'm not saying it's totally congruent, but I think there's something to be learned from looking at that.
Nancy,
maybe you've done a lot of looking, I don't know.
Nancy, Esther shared with me the copy that you provided her of the CBAR handbook, I guess I'll call it. And it's an interesting model, and it would be great if we had something like that here. I think that's a high standard, but I think it's one that we should look at. And I'll be sharing that with Xenia and the members of the committee, just so they can see not only for content, but also for style. I mean, it's nicely prepared and makes some of those important issues very accessible. So I appreciate your comments.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for all your work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Nancy. We appreciate that very much. Any other questions or comments?
Well, I guess Nancy made a comment that kind of circles back
Oh.
around to my comment about the planning commission and if there was anything that was going to be changing there. And it seems as though she's made a very good point, is that it seems as though there is the potential for duplication in our responsibilities when you start looking at the list that was assigned to us when we were given this job in the code or whatever it is that the city adopted for our committee. So as much as I think it's great that this process is taking place, I personally feel as though there's still work that needs to be done in advance of this being presented to the city council, but that this is good steps, and I'd like to encourage staff to continue doing that, and also looking at how the responsibilities of the DRC fit within the guidelines of the planning, so there's not an overlap there. Otherwise, we're gonna end up in the same place, even though we've been, very much well-intentioned to move beyond that.
Yeah, I don't want to speak for Esther, but I'll assume that, there is some work, I think, but I think we're really very close to the top, but we still have some climbing to do. And, I think rather than have it be written by the full committee or the other refinements that we're talking about, Esther and I know Esther and I would be willing to help staff with that if that was appropriate. May not be, and I know you may have your own conversation on that.
I think there's some legal expertise that needs to be,
There will definitely be legal
Yeah.
expertise and planning expertise,
but thank you, Pat, for thinking that I have that capacity, but you do, I don't.
That findings is that Nancy pointed out, we both referred to earlier as well, is one that's, it was written a long time ago, but it has lots of elements to it, and you say, what does that mean in the context of this new framework? So,
So what I think to maybe bridge it is, everything that's in the design, in the ordinance, will be your responsibility to review for those projects that are going to the planning commission. And I know that in some of the meetings we've had with the planning commission, they do defer to you in your role as the DRC. Again, it's unfortunate at this moment that we're having this conversation, because we're using examples that were not probably the appropriate examples. So I think there's a level of trust that just needs to be built between the DRC and the planning commission in this new, process.
yeah,
And both of these bodies are heading to the same goal. We want projects that reflect what's happening in Solvang and for the future. And so, this conversation, this is scheduled for the planning commission, the next meeting. And so you could attend that meeting, we can have that conversation at the
Okay.
planning commission, and we can work, I know that Chelsea has some work to do in responding to some of the comments that you have, but we think that we could start off the beginning of the year with
the new process.
a clean slate.
Yeah, and we can certainly, in between now and when we bring it to the planning commission, because we haven't finalized that staff report yet, we can certainly take your recommendations and work on some language that would, clarify the planning commission's authority to consider your recommendations and, review specific projects. I think the way it's drafted now has that big catch-all, so they certainly have the power to review specific projects, but staff can take a look to see if there's some clarity that can be made there, and consider your recommendation about, that they follow the recommendations, or they have to explain, that they aren't gonna follow them. So we can, work on incorporating that into what we're recommending for the Planning Commission's review.
Yeah, I think to me, it's just that there's the presumption of validity in our recommendation, and that if they choose to not follow it, that there also be an explanation as to why the deviation.
It's like the 500-foot rule.
Because certainly if there's other, broader changes to a project from decisions within the Planning Commission's purview, we would want them to have the flexibility to, let's say for lighting, to make some changes because some other structural piece of the project is changing. But the idea is not to have them ignore your recommendations wholesale
Sure, of course.
at all.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing is that when a project comes here, it's going on, that starts at the DRC, it's very possible that the Planning Commission is gonna make requirements that change the scope of the project, such as, that might impact some of our recommendations. If that's the case, does it ever have is there room where it goes from DRC to planning and then has to come back because there's been such a substantial change to the project? Is there a mechanism for that, or how does that work?
So the idea is that it would be a straight 3-step process. The Planning Commission would be implementing your recommendations, and so I think in general it would be up to them to take your recommendations and apply them to any parts of the project that expand in scope like that. However, the Planning Commission, I think, would be able to ask for clarification if they don't understand your recommendations or need more information about them. And that would potentially kick it back to you for further review, but they would have continued the item and not made a final decision. So we're not gonna have the situation where Planning Commission has made a final decision on the project and it comes back to you.
You're right.
But
Yeah.
it could be continued and sent back if
Yeah,
there
on
was
a
substantial.
narrow issue or something like
Yeah,
that, yeah.
right. I think that's good because
Yeah.
I do see that there could be an application for a project, the Planning Commission says, no, you can't do this, but you can do that, and that changes, some kind of lines, sight lines, landscaping, lighting, whatever it may be. But that they have the ability to table it and punt it back to the DRC and then have it returned. I think that's an important option. Not that I'm really wishing to have things bounce
Right.
back and forth. That's
Right.
quite the opposite of what we're trying to achieve.
But I think it would still be different than the current practice and less of a roundabout because there still wouldn't be a final decision on the project.
Right.
So applicants, I think, would be less confused by that.
Yes,
I agree.
yeah.
Yeah, I think the framework you've developed here is terrific. I think it offers, real possibility to address the kinds of issues we were talking about. Again, I appreciate all of your efforts together in your leadership, Senior, in putting that together. I think it's terrific. And what kind of action would you like from the DRC this evening?
There is no formal action required. It
Okay,
needs to
so
go.
it's not like,
So no vote required, just your comments, and
Okay.
we'll incorporate all your comments into, I think you've heard a lot of consistency from what you have said, so we'll incorporate that into what goes to the Planning Commission and then ultimately to the City Council.
I do have a question on that, addressing the Planning Commission, because you were saying that. Now, if any of us individually went to the Planning Commission, I would not be, if I attended, would I be speaking on behalf of the committee? I don't understand exactly how that works. Could you clarify that?
I think you would be speaking on behalf of yourself as a committee member.
Okay, that's what I thought, that I'm on the committee, this is what I saw, this is what, my thoughts on the project were.
And there is a lot less room for error or any kind of concern between you speaking to the Planning Commission versus to the City Council, which I'll work with you separately, because City Council establishes your duties and responsibility, whereas Planning Commission doesn't. So you're free to attend planning commission and speak on each of your behalfs if you'd like to.
Okay. And when is the next meeting in which this will be?
It's scheduled for the December 6th, Monday
Okay.
meeting, and
Okay,
it starts at 6 o'clock.
okay,
I'm unable to attend or Zoom in that evening,
okay.
but
I-
would be interested in hearing if
Yeah,
somebody else.
I can certainly plan on attending, and I would,
Okay,
on the 6th.
correct.
I would just make one more comment,
Yeah.
not in contrast to what you brought up, but as Lori was saying, and I do believe that the planning commission has the same goals in mind that we do. And we keep using the Alisal project as a good example and a bad example, but really, I believe that had we kind of had this in place before, we probably, all of that wouldn't have been an issue. So I mean, I have faith that both the committees can work together and appreciate each other's decisions and hopefully be a very streamlined process, regardless of what changes you make to this. You know, I do think we all have the same goals in mind, and I suspect the planning commission will be grateful to have our recommendation ahead of time so that they don't have to try to make those decisions on things that aren't necessarily in their wheelhouse, so.
That's a great comment.
Yeah,
That's a
totally
very
agree
good
with
comment.
that.
Yeah, I do too. Terrific. Okay. Any more on this item? I think we've completed our discussion and the plan's in place. Okay, great. Thank you all for your efforts on this. Any other member comments? On any, yeah, please.
I have comments, I just wanted to, in the,
I think we still have one item under
Yeah.
6B.
We do, we have 6B.
code enforcement.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Go ahead, let's see, what is that?
Code enforcement.
Oh, yeah, code enforcement,
Code
I'm sorry.
enforcement
Senior.
discussion. So yes, this item has been a couple of times requested by the committee to have a discussion on code enforcement and how we go about things, how our priorities are set. Unfortunately, our code enforcement officer was not available today. He's teaching a class at an army base. But I am here to answer any questions if you have. In summary, we've really been, since COVID-19 and kind of this explosion of science just out of necessity, since the city council reversed that relaxed direction and told us to go ahead and enforce the sign ordinance, we have been proactively enforcing the sign ordinance in the TRC, so in the business district. There's still more to enforce, and we are definitely, I would be pretty confidently saying that everyone has received a warning at this point. There's been some citations on those who have not wanted to comply with the warnings. But yes, there's still a few instances where I think sandwich boards come back out and other things, so we'll continue to work through those. So if you have any particular comments or questions that I can clarify for you or the public, I'm happy to respond.
Well, thank you. This is an area under the purview of the city manager and not DRC at all, except we make decisions that are, you know, or we get complaints because of sandwich boards or whatever. And it's good to know. And I think particularly, you know, it is coming as we emerge, if you will, from the challenges of the pandemic especially, and other factors that, you know, that's been, and you've had, you had to make some deep staffing reductions and so forth, and that's all part of it, but we just, if we make decisions or we have code provisions and they're not enforced, then we're wasting our time. You know, we got other things to do. But that's not a threat, it's just, I mean, it's not, that's won't happen, but just, it can be frustrating sometimes, and I know our frustration doesn't come near yours, you know, sometimes, so, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Anybody have any other?
I just
comments at this
have a
point?
general question. This is probably a legal question, actually. Where, it seems there's a lot of exceptions made for things that are already in existence, that were determined by other boards prior to us. I think we've talked about this before, there's some inconsistencies with, for instance, signs got approved that weren't necessarily following the code. What, I mean, is there, from this point moving forward, is there any legal statute to go back and enforce those signs, or those signs, or whatever they might be? I'm saying signs, it could be banners, it could be whatever. In other words, it seems like, when I was looking at getting my signs made for my business, I was going around and looking at everybody else's signs and seeing like half the signs weren't in compliance. And of course, as a business owner and just as a citizen, I don't like having to tattletale or cause another business difficulty. So I guess my question is there any follow-up on any of those, or are those just kind of, hey, they're there and there's real no discussion about that at this point?
Yeah, are they legal non-conforming at this point?
Right, yeah, I guess that's a good.
And then I'd like to add to that, and that is that those who come and do the process, as our applicants have come in front of us tonight, are doing the process and following the rules, so to speak, but there are many who choose to bypass that process. And to me, must be really feel really frustrating if I was the applicant and I had to do all the things that are required to have a sign, and yet somebody else down the street has a sign they just put up.
And I would say that even though our code enforcement is limited, we've definitely made the sign cleanup a priority and a big priority of what we are focusing on. We are proactively engaging in enforcement of the signs that are clearly in violation. Some of the signs, it's not a perfect science unless we have an inventory of every single sign in the city from the time Solving was originated, which would be a lot of research. But we do also look into issues complaint-based. So if somebody thinks that there is a sign that just doesn't make sense, it hasn't come to our attention, even though our code enforcement officer does proactively look at those and he knows what those parameters are. We also can take questions. We have the code enforcement information available online, and it's you can leave a message or send an email to the code enforcement officer, and he responds on a regular basis. I think that there is definitely some signs that are grandfathered in a way that are older signs, and then there's also some inconsistencies that we'll be coming forward with you with, for example, when it comes to flags and what the current ordinance says and what we actually see across the city. So there's a couple of those areas that we will be bringing forward to you to bring consistency and compliance to everyone.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Very good. Thank you, Xenia. I appreciate your report.
Thank you.
Okay, now we'll have
Committee member.
committee member comments.
So I just wanted to come and inform my fellow committee members here and the community that at the Elverhoy Museum of History and Art, where I'm the executive director, we are in the process of starting a project there. Plans have been submitted to the city for a grounds project, and it was determined that the visual impact was very minimal on the front, so it didn't require a DRC review. Most of the work is in the back, hardscapes and landscaping in the back, out of visual corridor. But I wanted to let you all know here that we do have a project going on, and someday I'm gonna let you know that it's done and then invite you to a party. But I felt as though it was my obligation to come in front of you here
That's
and
how you do
explain
it.
that. And I have talked to Lori about this as to how that does and doesn't need the DRC review and approval.
And I'll say, Esther, we came to the opening of the last event. You had renderings up around, if
Yes,
those are still there, then
Yes.
anyone can go and
yes, that's
see them.
correct.
And it's cool, it's very cool.
Yeah,
I
that's
think
great.
it'll be really
Mhm.
wonderful when it's
It
done.
will be.
Yes, nice.
Good. Other comments? Anybody?
I didn't know if anybody, oh, sorry, noticed there was some work being done on the spire of the, I can't think of the name of it, on First Street, the one that we first reviewed that we.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, is it King Frederick's or is that what it's called?
Frederick's Court, I think.
Frederick's Court, right. I don't know if it looked like they were painting the spire, but I thought possibly maybe they were just doing some like polishing or something of it. I don't know, I thought it'd be a shame if it was being painted because it's a copper patina spire, but, I mean, the whole roof and everything. But it looks like they're just doing one section. I just was curious, or I guess just something I noticed and didn't know if that was like a project that was underway or.
We have not been approached by them, yet, so we can go by and see what's on the
Sure.
ask them.
I'm hoping and thinking it's a polishing situation and they have to, I don't know anything about polishing copper and whether you have to leave something on there for a period of time. It didn't look like a color that I think they would choose for that, so that's kind of what made me think that, but I was just curious.
Okay. Okay, no more comments? Any city staff comments, other city staff comments? You have the calendar that you've attached.
We have a calendar. I have just one comment
Sure.
for your knowledge that's coming up as advance calendar on the next agenda for December. As you know, the City Council adopted the new logo that you all had an opportunity to comment on, and it's also within the scope of the current marketing contract to create sort of a branding catalog that then can be utilized to actually implement things going forward. So IDK right now is finalizing, having taken that logo, just some renderings for how the signage could look, etc. throughout the city. And they're also working on redesign for the visitor center. So I would like to bring forward for your review, as you are the official sign committee, the review of those proposed signs and just different stylistics that they're proposing based on that logo.
Okay,
So that will be coming up to you in December.
okay, good. Are there other does the meeting in December, we have a number of applications pending or whatever?
We have a number queuing up.
Yeah, okay, good.
Right now, we do have a request for the little building over here at the corner of Alisant Oak. They are renovating that right now.
Oh,
and,
yes.
They'll come forward with the colors that they would like to paint that building. So that definitely is an item that we know for sure will be coming before you. We have 3 other projects that we're working on that will, we hope to bring to the meeting.
Good.
And we will keep you posted on any other, signs or any other applications. At this point, we don't have any other sign applications queuing up.
Okay,
Remind me of the date.
Remind me of the date. 18th,
18th?
yes. The Huston Inn may come in with their sign plan by that time.
It's December 16.
The
Sorry,
16th?
16th, sorry.
yeah, it's 16. Okay, great.
We still are planning on meeting, primarily because, we want to get through some of these applications that, particularly the signs, we want to encourage people to come in and get permits as quickly as possible.
Sure. And then I saw on TV, we have a Yule Fest coming up. I saw Zini on the,
We do have Yule Fest coming up, so
Okay.
it's kicking off on November 27th, and there will be the tree lighting ceremony on December 3rd, and then a parade on December 4th, so those are.
that sounds great. Thank you, staff. Thank you, Chelsea and Lori and Xenia and Anna Marie. Appreciate all of your efforts for us and for the city today. Absent anything else to bring before the committee at this time, we're adjourned. Thank you.